Hi guys, so I thought instead of filming, which then requires editing and I have to put pictures in, and I'm just going to do screen capture with webcam. It's me and the webcam. And it's very basic stuff. You're going to hear me clicking and just swapping in between Word and Photoshop, but at least we can do some learning during this very crazy time, and I hope you are all safe and tucked up and adhering to the lockdown. So because these headphones hurt my ears, I'm going to do in this video just a very quick background to Chinua Achebe. I'm going to do the basic idea of what the poem is, and then I'm going to do the vocab, and then I'll do the analysis in another video. So Chinua Achebe was a poet, an essayist, a critic, a very well-known novelist. We, of course, did Things Fall Apart last year, for which he won the Man Booker Prize, 2007. And obviously, and we would have discussed this in class last year, but a Nigerian writer, and much of what he writes is drawn from and influenced by and taken from his experience as a Nigerian man. So I quite like this little picture. It's the Nigeria as in its flag. So it's the form of Nigeria with the Nigerian flag. And then that is Africa with the light green is Nigeria, and the dark green, the insert, is the Igbo region, which obviously relates to Things Fall Apart from last year. So I've said some of that stuff already. What I wanted to look at, just because I found it quite interesting, is the fact that Achebe wrote his poems. He only wrote one collection of poems, which was then republished, but with more poems in it. He wrote it during the Biafran War of Independence. So the Biafrans fought against, they wanted independence from Nigeria. He sided with the Biafrans. And he said that during that time he couldn't write novels. He needed to write something shorter and sharper that required less focus and less attention. So he published Beware Soul Brother in 1971. That was 23 poems. And then he extended that to 30 poems, Christmas in Biafra, and I think he published that in 1973. Here's the thing I find interesting. In both the collections of poems, he had a subsection, Poems About War, and then he had another section, Poems Not About War. And what's interesting to me is that Vultures is, for him, he doesn't include that in Poems About War. And even though he looks at the commandant of Bergen-Belsen concentration camp from World War II, he doesn't see this. He didn't see this as a poem about war, and I think that's because it's a poem about a lot more than war. It extends beyond war. If you hear any little whimpering in the background, that's my dog. She's sleeping on the bed and she's dreaming. So you might hear little yips in the background. There's a quote. I'm just going to push pause while I find the quote. Here we go, and this I took from Wikipedia. It's from a 1996 interview, and he says, "Belief in either radicalism or orthodoxy is too simplified a way of viewing things. Evil is never all evil. Goodness, on the other hand, is often tainted with selfishness." And I think if we're looking at this thing that is potentially bigger than war, that the poem is about, that's what it's about. That evil is never all evil, and that goodness is often tainted. There's often something wrong with goodness. You never have just one or the other, and I think that's a major theme that he explores throughout the poem. So your basic idea for the poem, and I've arranged this in according to the stanzas of the poem. Your first stanza is very basic. It's vultures in a tree in the early morning, and they are looking out over the corpse of the things that they have been eating. In the second stanza, the poet sort of muses about the nature of love and the fact that even vultures, even these cold, what are they? Scavengers, can feel love and can feel affection for each other. Your third stanza is a description of the commandant at Belsen, and it's quite a horrific description because he's also described as having the smell of human roast clinging to his nostrils, obviously referencing the deaths and the concentration camps during World War II that the Nazis brought about. But then the commandant is also described as taking chocolate home for his children. So this incredible contrast between absolute evil and a man who is still a father, a man who still cares for his children. And it's quite a chilling contrast. And your final stanza, we go back more to the musing and the idea that even evil can feel love, but a question for the reader is evil always perpetuated? Despite whatever good there is evil something that will always continue? And I think an important point for the poem, an important thing to look out for, is that there's contrast throughout. There's this dualism throughout. The contrast between good and bad, the contrast between love. He doesn't actually talk about hate. That's interesting, but it's suggested, I think, in the reference to a Nazi commandant. So we're going to look at some vocab, and then I'm going to call it for the day because these things are squeezing my brain and it's hurting. Okay, so vocab. Let me get my brush. There we go. Let me turn my brush the right way around. Despondent means despairing, hopeless, but it's an extreme sense of despair. It's not just like being sad. If you're despondent, you've lost all hope. A harbinger is a messenger. Let me just erase that so you can see that again. Okay, so there we go. A harbinger is a messenger. And it's an old word, almost archaic word, but it has the sense also of impending doom because of the way in which the word has been used. Nestled is an interesting word. It means to sort of snuggle up, to get close to in an affectionate way. But I think it's an appropriate word as well because he's talking about birds, and the root to the word obviously is nest. Don't think there's anything there that's too difficult. I just want to look at trench. So trench is a hole, but it's a bit more than a hole. It's not a round hole or a square hole. It's a long sort of rectangular hole that's dug. And you could think of a trench, I suppose farmers might use trenches, but actually the association of the word is got a lot more to do with warfare, and especially more World War I, but definitely also World War II, where trenches were dug in order to fight from. And in World War I in particular, they had these, in certain battle areas, they had these sort of vast areas of connected trenches where people fought from. Bowel, I'm going to show you a gross image. Be ready for it. If you don't want to see the gross image, look away now. Those are bowels, your intestines. So the animals are eating the bowels. The vultures are eating the bowels. And there's a reason I show you that gross image, is because that is the sort of grossness that Achebe wants to portray when he says ate the things in its bowel. Choose their roost. Where they roost for the night is where they settle for the night. Oh, gorged. If you gorge yourself, you eat yourself to your full. You cannot eat anymore. You are gorged. You've just like shoved everything in. Hollowed, as the word suggests, it's become hollow. So the thing that they are eating is now empty. Let me clear some of that up. Remnant is leftover. That is more metaphoric, so we'll discuss that in the analysis. Let me move this. Charnel house. Not too gross an image that I'm going to show you, but just be ready for it. There we go. A charnel house is where, I suppose they did it in two ways. They either would have gotten the flesh stripped off the bones first and then put it in the charnel house, or they could have put the dead body in the charnel house, waited for the flesh to rot away and then put the bones in. I think one of the weird things that I found interesting about charnel houses is the bones are often decoratively arranged, as one does with bones, I suppose. But this is a bit more of what a charnel house would look like, where the dead are placed and the bones are just sort of left there. Okay, so commandant is the person in charge in this instance of Belsen camp. So Belsen camp is one of the Nazi concentration camps. What's interesting, and this is separate to the poem, please don't bring this up in a matric exam, they didn't actually have gas chambers at Belsen. And I don't think Achebe knew that because of what he's writing about the fumes of human roast. They did obviously have massive death at Belsen camp, mainly from being underfed and undercared for, people freezing to death, etc. And I'm going to show you a really horrific image. So if you are sensitive, good time to look away now. But that's a trench actually, and the people who died, many of the people who died at Bergen-Belsen, they had up to 35,000 deaths at Bergen-Belsen, and I think this image also for me connects to the vultures eating the thing in the trench. Yeah, quite a horrific image. Tender I want to look at when we sort of unpack the poem. I want to look at the multiple meanings of the word, especially when we're talking about feeding on things. Bounteous. If something is bounteous, there is plenty. It's the sense of having a lot. So yeah, when we look at the line, it'll make more sense. Providence. I actually just want to pull up the explanation that I found. Where is providence? There. Is divine grace or care, the care or control of God. So it's the sense that there is something taking care of us. So you must give thanks to this God that gives us all of this plentiful stuff. And we'll look at the line again later. An ogre is an evil giant, and a modern understanding or reference to ogre might be Shrek, but don't really think about that because Shrek is Disneyfied and cute, and that's not the image that Achebe had in mind here. A glowworm, I'll show you pictures of a glowworm now. It's an insect and its butt glows. So there's the glowworm with glowy butt, but quite beautiful as well because they make these little fluorescent lights within the spaces that they are in. Encapsulated means to be within a capsule. So if you think of a pull, let me draw a capsule because I know you like my drawings. Here's a pull. It's a capsule. Okay, if something is encapsulated, it is held within a capsule. It's so this tenderness, not that it's put inside a pull, but the tenderness that he's talking about here is held within these icy caverns. Let me show you a picture of an icy cavern. It's essentially an icy cave, but I'm going to push pause quickly. Cool picture of an icy cavern over here, and I quite like this because of the light, and we'll discuss this image a bit later in relation to the poem. I'm getting so tired. Sorry for the big yawn. Oh. Okay, so despair, like despondent, hopeless. And then germ over here is not a virus or a bacteria, it's a seed. And that again is also a bit more of an archaic use of the word, but in the very germ, in the very seed of that love. Kindred refers to family, and we'll unpack why it's referred to as family love. And when we look at the poem as a whole, lodged, forcefully stuck. Forcefully stuck. It's nap time. Oh, it's nap time. Okay. Sorry. And perpetuity is forever. Something continuing on and on forever. Okay, that's 15 minutes. I'm tired. I'm going to go and play computer games. I will post later on the analysis.